Hello everyone, welcome to AnalytixCloud. This is ID host Gaurav, and today we are coming up with the part 3 of our Azure real-time end-to-end project. Okay, so if you remember, we were in the very first part we were discussing about a new project which was oil and gas industry company with respect to the supply chain. Okay, so first of all, if you are new to this and if you are directly starting from this part, I will request you to watch our first part and the second part, where in the first part we have described about these medallion architecture which you can see, and the second part is where we have provisioned our Azure resources. Okay, so just to give a brief recap so that we can proceed further. This is what we discussed in a very first part where we were dealing with the oil and gas industry project where there was multiple teams like engineering team, procurement team, shipping team, logistics team, right? And we were having the data from different teams, and we were supposed to bring it into one single source of truth, which was the raw format. As you could see in this image here, we have different sources like in this particular use case where we have mentioned like we have SAP, SQL, SFTP, or shared location. It could be anything, or it could be on-premise SQL Server. So that's what we have taken in our use case, right? So where you'll have a, let's say, different sources, you could have different teams that will be storing the data into different source. Now in order to do any kind of a business like kind of a in order to do any kind of a business transformations, or to come up to conclude any of these problems that business has, you first of all you need to bring all the data into one single source of truth, right? And that's what we discussed, and that's what we will be going to do in this particular part. Okay, so if you'll see here where we will be having an on-premise SQL server here. Okay, so we'll be having an on-premise, and we will be loading the data from this on-premise SQL server into our very first layer, which will be the raw layer. Okay, so we are going with the based on the medallion architecture. First of all, we will be we'll load the exact replica of the source data into the raw format. Then we will be having bronze, silver, and gold. So we will be coming to Databricks for the bronze, silver, and gold in the next part. This part will be more focusing on extracting the data from these different sources through Azure Data Factory and bringing the data into the raw format, right? So they could be actually, in any of the real-time project that you work, most of the migration project, if you take the very first part, will be in order to bring the entire data from different sources to one single source of truth. That could be either Azure Data Lake Storage or Azure Blob, whatever your architect could be. Okay, so that's where this part 3 will be focusing more on. We could have where we will be focusing how do we create a new Azure Data Factory pipeline, how do we establish a connection between Azure Data Factory to this on-premise data sources, and what all kind of activities do we need in that particular pipeline. And or not just that, we will be also focusing on the some best practices while creation of this Azure Data Factory pipeline, right? Like let's say we have a requirement where we have multiple tables that is coming from on-premise, right? There could be multiple approach of building this pipeline. Like you can have one pipeline for one table, or you can have a dynamic pipeline where you could just create one pipeline and you could load multiple tables from just one pipeline, right? And so we will be following the best approach that could be. And the design that we have made is like is basically what we follow in a real-time project. Okay, so that's what we are going to discuss in this part. So let me just go to the Azure portal and uh, start showing you what resources do we need and why do we need those. Okay, so this is portal.azure.com. We have landed into the home page. Okay, so this is where we will be creating our uh, pipelines in Azure Data Factory. If you remember, in the part 2 we have shown how do we provision these resources. Like we have Azure Data Factory, we have Key Vault, we have Azure Data Lake Storage where we are bringing the data from on-premise, correct? Then we have Azure SQL Server. So like we are using this Azure SQL Server for multiple purposes. Okay, once I'll start Azure Data Factory pipeline explanation, I'll show it to you what all optimization technique, like what best approaches have we taken. Like we have introduced a control table, we have pipeline error table, we have log tables. So all of these tables are used in real-time projects, and that is one of the best way in order to create of the pipelines where you could have the audit of those pipelines as well. Okay, so we will be dealing with all of these scenarios today. Okay, before starting the creation of the pipeline, let me also show you our SQL Server Management Studio, where we have connected to these two different servers. The first server which you could see is the desktop one, which is basically connected to my system, which is an on-premise system which we are taking as our use case. Okay, here if you'll see, we have this server name, we have this database which is supply chain, and in this supply chain, so I just named this database as supply chain because since we are working for the supply chain project here. If you remember, we discussed with respect to different teams that might belong to the supply chain, that there could be engineering team, procurement team, there could be logistics team, there could be supplier team, right? So based on that, what we have done is we have created a few of the tables. As if you'll see here, we have the product table, we have, if I just expand this, you can see what all columns we have. Like we have product ID, what is the product type, what is the product price, right? Similarly, we have supplier table. Let me go to the supplier first, where we have supplier ID, we have that TIN number and the company name, registration, so all the information that is with respect to the supplier. Okay, then similarly we have the transportation table, where we'll be having the transportation ID and what is the mode of the transportation basically, correct? And then we have the fourth table, which is our purchase order table, where we have those uh, product ID, availability, revenue generated, and all of these related information that is with respect to the supply chain data that we are dealing with. Okay, do let us know if you want to know more about this particular explanation of the data dictionary, so we can bring a more video onto that, but currently we are just focusing on basically creation of the pipelines, where we'll be loading this data from this on-premise to Azure, and not much going into this business understanding as of now, but definitely we'll be going into our coming videos, when we will be establishing these creation, like doing some business transformation in the Databricks. Then we will be following you with what does this data looks like, what sense does this data makes, right? So we'll come into that into our later parts. So coming to this four tables that I've just recently showed it to you, these three tables, which is one is the product table, the other is supply table, and the other table is the transportation table. These three tables are the dimension table that we have taken. Okay, and this purchase order table will be the fact table. So all of this dimension table will be kind of, if we'll talk about that in terms of ER diagram, all this dimension table will be directly connected to the purchase order table, which will be the fact table. And this fact table will be having all the foreign keys which that will be present, which will be pointing to the primary keys of the other dimension tables. Okay, so this is the concept of a data modeling. If you are not familiar with this, do let us know in the comments. We can have a separate video on this data modeling as well. Okay, so if you'll see, so these three dimension tables that we have, which is the product, the supplier, and the transportation, will be connected to this fact, which is the purchase order. Okay, now the very first intention of us is, if I'll go to the this screenshot, where we have now this all this data into on-premise. Right, now we need to bring all this data from this on-premises to this raw layer. So let me go to this raw layer first. So if I'll go to this Azure portal, I have the storage account. So this is what we have created in our part 2 video. So if you'll see, this is the storage account that we have created. If I'll go inside this, you should go to the containers, and it is having this raw container that is already created. Okay, so you just don't have to do anything. Once you are able to create your resource, the ADLS resource, you just have to click on this container, and you just have to give the name, and that's it. Your resource, like your container, will be created. Okay, so now we are good with the on-premise data that we have in the SQL Server that I've recently showed it to you. We also have the ADLS created, and we have the raw container that is already present there into the ADLS, right? The next part that we have to focus on is Azure Data Factory, which is the master tool who will be extracting the data from these sources and will be loading the data into this raw layer. So now let us just go to this Azure Data Factory first. Okay, so either this is where I could see what all recent resources that I have used. Either you can go from this recent, or you could just search for this. You search for your data factory. Okay, so like if I'll go here, data factories, it will show you all the data factories that you have. Since we are only using one subscription as of now, we don't have to filter it based on different subscription or resource group. So you can directly go click on it, and you could just launch Studio. So we have already created the pipelines for you, because it would take much time if you'll be creating on the runtime and you don't want to focus more on or like investing much time on that. We want you to have a clear understanding with the concepts. So we'll be focusing more on the concepts, and you should feel free to comment us if you have any doubts with respect to this. Okay, so let me introduce you data factory which we have. These are the different resources that is available where we have pipelines. So this is the pipeline that we have created, which is, if I'll just expand this a bit. So as the name suggests, it is copy on-premise to Azure SQL. So we are copying the data from on-premise to Azure SQL, full and incremental. So there are two things basically. Now, let's say you have the requirement, right, where you want to copy the entire data from different sources and bring it into Azure Data Lake storage, which will be the single source of truth, right? Now, let's say today this migration happened, and there are four tables that we just saw, which is product table, we have purchase order, we have supplier, we have transportation. Now, if we do a copy activity, let's say we will be having one copy activity which will be copying the data from source to sink, right? Let's say if we do that copy activity today, what it will do, it will copy the entire data that is present in those four tables, and it will load that data today into our ADLS. Okay, but what if let's say tomorrow like let's say tomorrow you'll get some new data into your source, correct? So let's say tomorrow there could be some additional purchase order that would have created. So again, that purchase order record will be added to that particular SQL server, on-premise SQL server which you have, correct? So that on-premise SQL server, that new record basically could be transfer to ADLS in two ways. Let me just open the whiteboard for you so that I can explain you better. So I'll just create a new whiteboard. Okay, so let me start with a blank one. I'll just take the pen. Okay, so now let's say you have on-premise SQL server and data, right? It could be anything. You have any data which is finally your source, basically, we could say. So our main intention is we are bringing all the data from our source into, which is on premise, into Azure, correct? So let's say if today we have some, let's say we have some 26 as date, then the very first load, like let's say if I'm in Azure, I went to the Azure Data Factory. If inside the Azure Data Factory I created a pipeline, inside this pipeline I have a copy activity, let's say. So this copy activity, what I could do is, in the source I could select table, okay, or I could write a query, let's say select star from the table. So it will bring all the data, right? And then we will be having a sink which will be pointing to our ADLS, correct? So if any of the approach that we took, basically, uh, it will load the entire data that we have currently till this date, right? So this is kind of a full load that we are doing. Okay. Now, if I'm coming to the next date, let's say if I'm talking about tomorrow, if there could be a chances that there should be any new data that would have added, right? Right. Let's say additional data. So now, in order to load this additional data. Since now we are into the next day, this data that we have currently into our ADLS is not up to date, right? So we need to update it. So either we can do a full load, like again performing the same activity that we have done yesterday. So it will just do a full load where we will be loading the entire data. And then the second thing could be an incremental load, right, where you'll be focusing more on only those data which is added newly, like which is added today, you could say. So that is what is called as incremental load. So you should have a pipeline that should basically counter both of these scenarios. It should also deal with the full load, it should also deal with the incremental load. I have, like, based on my experience, I've worked on multiple companies, I've seen a lot of pipelines. There were a few projects too where people are following different approaches, where they have different pipeline for full load, different pipeline for incremental load. But uh, if I'll tell you like what could be the best way, is like you should have that dynamic approach there in the pipeline. Like you should try to avoid more number of pipelines. You should try to, if all the tasks could be done in one pipeline itself, that would be really better, right? So that's what we have tried to make in this particular use case. We have created those pipeline that could be the best way in order to perform this task. So we'll come into that. So let's say if I'll so I hope you would have understood this full load and incremental load. So let me go to the Azure Data Factory. Okay, so this particular pipeline will be taking care of the full load and incremental load. I will be showing it to you how exactly we'll be doing it. We'll come into that a later picture. Probably I'll just brief you some more components of the Azure Data Factory that we have here. So we have created three different data sets here. Okay, like if you could see, one is Azure SQL table. So this data set is basically pointing to your Azure SQL that we have created. Okay, then we have Parquet. So this is where, let's say, what we are doing is we are bringing the entire data from on-premise. We are loading it into Azure storage, Azure Data Lake storage. So that the format of the file on which we are loading is Parquet. So that's what this data set is. Similarly, we do have SQL control table, which is basically pointing to those control tables that we have. So I'll just go to the, let's say, manage sections, and here we have those link services that is created. So if you go to the screenshot of the very first session that we have, like if you remember what type of resources that we would need, I told you. So we created this ADLS. So we were having a storage account, right? Then we should have a connection to this on-premise SQL server that we have, correct? Then we were also using Key Vault, correct? So we should also have a connection to the Key Vault, correct? So basically we have a storage account, we have on-premise, we have Key Vault, and there should be one more connection for Azure SQL where we are maintaining our control table, audit tables, error log tables, and all this stuff, right? So these are the four linked services that is created. If you click on this, if you see, this is the URL of the storage account that we have. Okay, so how do you get this? If you go to this portal, you go to your storage account. Okay, and let me go to the containers. Now you have this raw. If I'll go to the properties, right? So this, if you could see, if I'll go back here, ADLS supply chain dev dfs core.windows.net, right? So ADLS supply chain dev, this is our storage account name that we have given. So this storage account name should be there. Along with that, you need to concatenate all these WFS core Windows.net. So this is what the URL that will allow you to connect to this particular storage account. And if you want directly to connect to the raw, you could just provide this URL that we are currently seeing, so that it will have the exact location of this particular container. Okay, and then as I told you, this is one of the best approach you must follow basically whenever you are creating the pipelines, that you should not hard code your like sensitive information like database password or Azure storage account keys, or any information that should be restricted, right? So those kind of information must be there into the Azure Key Vault, right? And that's where we have created the Azure Key Vault, where we have created the secrets. So if you go in, if you see this Azure Key Vault, you will have to go to the secrets. Okay, then you need to generate a new secret from here, where you will be giving them secret name, let's say, and here you need to give the password. So you won't be able to see the password, that will be encrypted, and you just have to create it, and that's it. You will be having those secrets that will be created. Now if you will select Azure Key Vault here, this linked services that you have created for the Key Vault, that you can just select it from the drop down, and then you can select what the like what secret name that you want to connect. Okay, once you'll provide the secret name, you can just do a test connection, and if it works, then it should be fine. Okay, so that's how you should basically create the linked service, and that's how you are supposed to create the Azure Key Vault. Okay, so that is with respect to the data lake storage. If I'll tell you how to create it, let's say you just have to create on the new for the linked service. You just have to search for Azure Data Lake Storage, and you could just create the link service from here. Okay. Similarly, we have for the Key Vault, where you need to specify the Key Vault URL, and then just authentication method as system assigned managed entity, and that's it. Okay, so the Key Vault link service will be ready. So now we have Azure SQL DB. Okay, so if I'll go to our resources, you'll see this is the SQL server that we have. If I go to the database, this is our database. Okay, you can just go to the query editor. You can provide your password. So either way, you could just log into your query editor from here, or you could just connect to this Azure SQL Server from your SSMS that you would have installed, which we have already done here, right? So both the way you could connect to your Azure SQL Server, and you could do the query. There's some issue with this particular authentication. So fine. Now this is how you are connecting to your Azure SQL Server, where you have passed fully qualified domain name. This is the database name that we have. If you could see, we have it here. If I'll go to here, the overview, this is the database name, right? So that's what we have provided. Then the authentication type, we have provided the username as dev admin, whatever it was given as the configuration time. And this is the Key Vault, where we're connecting to the linked service, which is pointed to the Key Vault. And then we have a secret name. So this secret name, Azure SQL password, is there into the Key Vault, which is storing the password for this particular user. All right, so that's how you are just referring to a SQL password. If I'll go here, and you could just see, or like, let's say if it is enabled, what versions it has, or what exactly the password, you could also copy it from here. Okay, so that's how you are basically restricting the users to not seeing the password directly. Instead they'll have to instead it is directly stored in the Key Vault, right? So that's how it works. So if I go back, so I just do a test connection. Yeah, so it is successful. So we are able to connect to the Key Vault. We are able to connect to the Azure SQL Server. Now this is the on-premise SQL Server. Okay, so before like one more topic that I would like to say to you, like if you go back, all of these three linked services that we were seeing just now, one for the storage, one for the Key Vault, one for the SQL database, all of these are the resources that is already there in the Azure. Correct. So if you see, this is the linked services that we are creating. So let me show it to you like this way. If I create a new linked service, and if I select Azure data lake storage, okay, let's say I'll just give a name like this. So this is the connect via integration runtime, the option where we are supposed to select. Let's say where we, if you could see, we have auto resolve integration runtime, we have SHIR, which stands for self-hosted integration runtime, right? So auto resolve integration runtime is the basically it allows you that compute capability where you be able to connect to all the resources that is present in Azure network. right? It doesn't have to go to any other network, any external network to connect to these resources. That's where it's called as auto resolve integration runtime. That is set by default. Okay. When we are dealing with some on-premise SQL servers or any network which is outside Azure, this auto resolve integration runtime won't work. There, in that case, you'll have to go for any self-hosted integration runtime. So what you'll have to do is, let's say here we have different integration runtimes. You'll have to click on this new integration runtime. If you could see here, you have Azure self-hosted integration runtime, right? So you just have to click on this. You can select the self-hosted integration runtime. You could give some kind of a name to it, and then let's say if I create it, just for your reference, we have two options in order to install this integration runtime. Either you could go with the express setup, or either you could go with the manual setup. So let's say since I do have this on-premise SQL server on my laptop itself, on my personal PC, I could just directly download it from this express setup, and I could install it where I could connect it to the our on-premise SQL server that we are dealing with. Let's say if there would be a case like the on-premise SQL server is not into your PC and it is into some other VMs, then you could just do a manual setup where you could just where you could download this integration runtime into their VM, and you can use this key in order to authenticate to that particular integration runtime. Okay, so that's how we basically use to connect to on-premise or any resources that is outside of the Azure network. So this is also one of the very most important interview questions that is being recently asked. Like, what are different types of Azure integration? Basically, what are different types of this integration runtimes? Where we have Azure integration runtime, which is auto resolve integration runtimes, which is used for connecting any resources that is in the Azure network. Then we have self-hosted integration runtime, which will be used to connect to all those resources that is outside the Azure network. And then we also have the Azure SSIS integration runtime. So before, like earlier, like there were a lot of companies who were using those MSBI, SSIS for the ETL operations, where they were having, where they were also creating those ETL pipelines in order to do this, all of these operations that we are currently doing in this data factory, right? So if there will be, since that was also a Microsoft product, which was a Microsoft BI product, so Microsoft has given an extra capability where if you are working with those Microsoft projects before, you could just do a lift and shift of those SSIS packages to this ADF basically. So that's what is integration runtime, and that's why it is used. Okay, so coming to the SQL Server, since it is on-premise, we are using the self-hosted integration runtime. We are passing the server name. Definitely, you need to connect to the like particular server. What is the database that you want to connect, because one server could have multiple databases, right? What kind of authentication that you are required? So it could be window authentication, it could be SQL authentication. Currently we are going with the Windows authentication, so we have the username and the linked service. I have stored this password of this particular my user into this key vault, and I've kept the secret name as password SQL DB, and that's what it is being used for. Okay, so I hope you are clear with this linked services. Okay, these parts you could just we can just ignore as of now. Since we are not covering all of these stuff as of now, let's go to our pipeline first. Okay, so let me go into depth by one on one, by taking one activity at a time. So this is a pipeline. What you could do is you could just click on this add plus button, and you could create any kind of a resource factory resources basically that you want. Either you want to create a pipeline, or either you want to create a CDC, or you want to create a data set, a data flow, Power Query, all of these stuff, right? In our case, what we have done, we have created a one pipeline. So that's what this is. Let's see, if I'll create a pipeline just for your reference, this is how it will look like. It will be having a blank pipeline, like just kind of like a control flow, where this is the section where you'll be able to see the properties. Okay, you just have to hover it and it will show you what exactly this button means. So this is the properties where you could just name your pipelines. Let's say test pipeline, and you could just give a description so that any other developer who might come into this pipeline, he could just have a look to this description and he could have a fair understanding that okay, what exactly this pipeline does. Okay, this related is something like, let's say there could be a scenario where your pipeline, one of the pipeline could be connected to other pipeline, right? You can have a dependency between different pipelines. So it will show you like whether this pipeline that you have created, is it related to any other resources of the data factory that you have created. So I'll just tell you an example. Like, let's say if I'll go to the data sets. So if this is the properties, right? So this is the name of the data set. This is related to this particular pipeline. So I have a fair understanding. Okay, this data set is related to this. So if I, let's say, if I in future, if I want to delete those data sets which are not being used, I can just go here and I could see if the related is 0, that means it is not being used anywhere and it is safe to delete, correct? So that's what it is. And if I just close this pipeline and we don't need it, okay. So and this is the, if I'll go here, this is the JSON code representation of this resources. So that this is something which will be automatically created whenever whatever activities you do in your pipeline, it will create the JSON by default here. And you could just, also one more flexibility that you have is you could just copy this JSON, and let's say if you want to uh, like, let's say if you just paste this into a new particular pipeline, it will just create that new pipeline. You just have to change few of the parameters, like usually have to change the name of the pipeline, because you can't have same pipe, like more than one pipeline with the same name, right? So you have those flexibility and all. So let's come to this activities now. Like, now we are inside the pipeline, we have multiple activities. If you see here, we have, you could just expand it, you don't have to learn this, you could just find it here. Like if you go to the move and transform, you have these two activities: copy data, data flow. If you want to do a synapse, you have notebook, spark, job definitions. Similarly, if you want to connect to database, you have notebook, jar, and python activity, right? So you have, you have all of these activities are listed here. You don't have to learn this. You just have to come here. If you want to have a copy, you could just search it here and you will get the results. Okay, so and you just have to click on it and you have to drag it like this. Okay, and that's it. So it's pretty much straightforward. Okay, I'll just now let me go to the this activity, which is a lookup activity. So you just have to search for a lookup activity, and here it is. Okay, so I'll go to this lookup activity explanation, where we have and we have just given it as a get control table. If I go to the settings of this lookup activity, if you'll see this activity, so if you're creating an activity, definitely it has to serve any purpose, and to serve any purpose, it should connect to any kind of resource, either on-premise or some SQL or Azure. So in order to do that, we should have a data set, right? So that's where you are supposed to create the data set. So if you'll see, this source data set is Azure SQL table, basically, which, so this lookup is pointing to this data set. If you could just go, if you could just open it, before opening, if you want to, let's say if I'm just doing it for the first time, there won't be any data set here. So I could just create it from here, new. I could, let's say if I'm connecting to Azure SQL Server, right? So I could just search for Azure, and here you have Azure SQL database. You could just connect to Azure database data table. You have Azure Synapse Analytics, then you have Azure Cosmos DB. So all of these like options you have. So we have selected Azure SQL, basically Azure database, so that we could connect to this to the tables that we have in the database, right? So if I'll open this, so we now, this data set, we have selected that okay, we need Azure SQL database. Okay, but now this database should connect to some kind of, like, basically to those server, to that database specifically, right? So that will be done through the linked services that I've recently showed it to you, that we have created different linked services, right? So this is the linked service where we are connecting it. Either you could specify the table from here, or you could just parameterize it. So in our case, we are dealing with the control tables, and this is something which is never going to get changed. Hence, that's why we have selected the directly the table, which is the control table here, right? So if you'll just do a preview data here, so it will directly it will show you those record that is present in those control table. If I'll go, before going to this, let's say if I'll go to this SQL Server Management Studio, if you see, we have this Azure SQL DB. If I'll go to this control table, if I'll just query it, let's select start from dbo.control table. Okay, let's wait for this execution. Meanwhile, let's go here. So if you'll see, we have all of these columns and the fields that we are basically capturing. Okay, so let me so here we have the output. If you could see here, Okay, so let me go to each column one by one. I think this will be more readable to you because it is more zoom. So let us just take it from here. Okay, so we have this table, control table, where we are capturing all this field. So don't worry about all of the DDLs. We will be sharing you each and every TDLs of this table, so you could just create these control tables on your local system or on your Azure, and you could just do the practice, and you could let us know if you have any difficulties in the comments. Okay, so we have different columns. Like let's say if I talk about the source system name, so like what kind of a system it is, basically what business it belongs to, if it belongs to sales team, procurement team, supply team, shipping team, what kind of a source object is. It could be table, it could be some kind of a file, it could be from SFTP, it could be anything, right? So we, in our case, we are taking the data from on premises. All of the object type are table. What is the object schema? Okay, so we have the DBO schema here. Like let's say there could be, like in a database there could be multiple schemas, right? So currently we have all of our tables into this schema, hence we have DBA schema in all our tables. What is the source object name? So we have purchase order table, we have product table, we have supplier table, we have transportation table. What is the location? So this could be used when we are dealing with any kind of a file. So since we are not dealing with a file, we have just kept it as a blank. You could kept it as null, you could kept it as NA. So it's based on you. Then we have the target location. So based on our design that we have showed it to you, like where we are first loading the entire data into the raw layer, which is basically the replica of the source, and the target location is the raw container, which I just showed you in the beginning, correct? And then we have the target object name. So in the raw layer and the container, what will be the object name which will be copying? So we have just kept the same object name that we have in the source as the target object name. This file format is NA because it doesn't belong to us, because this is for the tables and not for the files. So that's the reason we have kept it as NA. We are not going with any other partition columns. That's why it is kept as null. What is the load type? I have given you initially, like I've explained to you what load types we have. We can have incremental, we can have full load. Then what watermark column do we need, right? So uh, okay, so let's say if I tell you, if I'll go back to the whiteboard. Okay, so here in this case, I was saying yesterday till, like let's say till 26, all of this data was loaded. On 27th, I want to bring the incremental data load, right? So how do you figure it out? Let's say you must write some query, like let's say like you have as a source data. Let's say if I want to write, select star from table where, let's say creation date. Let's say we have creation date. Let's say whenever there is any record that is being added into this source table, there is a creation date for that record. So we can say like, okay, when creation date is greater than 26, right? Or it could be like anything like 26, 10, 2023, sometimes time, right? So this creation date, based on this creation date, we are able to figure it out that okay, any new records which is having the creation date greater than this 26 means that it is new record. Since the last insertion date that we did, last insertion of the data that we did was having the creation date as 26, right? So that's how we figure it out that this is the new data. So this particular column which we are saying could be some kind of a watermark column. So you could read more on the watermark on the Microsoft website as well, where you could just search for the ADF incremental pipelines, and you could figure it out what exactly is watermark. But yeah, uh, uh, so here in our case, if you could see this, like if you'll see if you'll go to the Microsoft website also, there will be they have a watermark table where they're capturing watermark column and the watermark value. But in our case, we are not taking any watermark table. We are just creating one table, which is a control table, and we are performing each and every step from that table. We are not creating any additional table as watermark table or some other tables. We are just going for the control table or whatever kind of load that you want to do, whether it is full load, full flush load, or incremental load. Whatever load that you are doing basically should be handled from that one control table that we have, right? So let's say today we have 4 tables, tomorrow there might be a scenario you have 4,000 tables, right? So you don't have to create different 4,000 pipelines again for those tables. Instead, you just have to make an entry of those tables, defining what is the table name, what is the source, what is the destination, if it is the incremental, what is the watermark column, into our control table. So that's what the dynamic nature basically that we want to bring it into our pipeline, correct? So I hope you would have understood this watermark column. So that's what we are referring to, this watermark column here. Okay, so that means this particular table which we have, the purchase order, it should be having some purchase order ID, which is the primary key of this table, which is uniquely identifying the records into this table, right? So that means, let's say tomorrow, yesterday, if I would have loaded the data, the purchase order ID is 50. So if today I'm loading, I will look for those records which is having the purchase order ID greater than 50. That means those are the new record that is added, correct? So those are the, that's what the watermark column is here. And similarly, these are the full load. So we do not want to do any kind of like we do not have any where clause in this in this condition basically. Like let's say select star from table where this column is greater than this value, right? We just that select star from table, like insert into table, select star from this table. So that is kind of a full load. So we are not worried about any watermark column. That's the reason we are having blank here. Then what is the creation time for these records? What is the indicator? So in this indicator is again one more important concept. Like let's say you have control table, you have 1,000 4,000 tables into your control table. So this lookup activity which we are dealing with will be taking the values from this control table. So there might be a scenario where this control table could have 400 values. So this lookup, while running the pipeline, this lookup activity should not take all the 400 tables. Instead, it should we should put some condition like, okay, from this control table, because that is only one single source of truth for us, it will have all the tables. Just take those tables which is having indicator as one. That means we are saying that we are only worried for these particular indicator table, like for those tables we want to load only these tables which is having indicator as one, so that it should not simply loop all the unnecessary tables, right? Then we have the status as succeeded, and then last successful date, and the watermark value. So it was also stored in the watermark value, if you could see here. Okay, how it is doing, why it is doing. So why it is doing, I've already told you. How it is doing, I'll just show it to you now. Okay, so this is the control table that we have. Okay, so if I'll go to the, okay, so let's go one by one. So we are into the lookup activity as of now. Okay, let's just focus on this. We are looking for this source data set which is pointing to the control table. We have recently seen what all columns that we have in the control table, correct? Now I'm using this query option in order to select all those records from the control table where indicator is equals to 1. As I just told you that we are only concerned about those tables which is having indicator is equals to 1. That means those tables only we want to load currently. If you will directly select the table, what it will do is this lookup activity will give whatever it will fetch. Basically what lookup will do is it will, whatever the data set that you pass, whatever let's say whatever the data that we have into that data set, it will just give you all the values that is present as an output, right? We will see the output once I run the pipeline. So in order to restrict all the unnecessary output, we have put a condition where indicator is equals to 1, right? Then we have some certain kind of a timeout, and that's it. So here if you'll see, if I'll preview data, we will be having those 4 records because currently we have all the 4 records that we have is having indicator equals to 1. Okay, so now what happens? Let's say I have to load all of these 4 tables now into Azure Data Lake storage, correct? So I have all these columns as an input. Now we must take one input at a time. Like let's say we need certain kind of a loop where we'll be taking all of these sources as an input, and we'll be doing certain some copy either in a sequential manner or in a parallel fashion, right? So that's where we have used the for each activity. So here you could just go to the activity where you could search for the for each activity, and you could just bring it, drag and drop, and this for each activity should be connected to this lookup in order to get the output of this lookup activity as an input to this for each, right? So what I mean to say is this for each, if I'll go to the settings, if I'll go to the items, you'll see this is taking the input from this activity, which is get control table, which is nothing but the lookup activity which we just saw. It is taking the input from this activity, which is the output of this lookup activity that we have, right? So this value will give us all the value that is present into that lookup table which we are looking, that is the control table. Right now, let's say we will be getting all values in a loop, then we are concerned with the copy, correct? Now if you want to do this copy, now let's say we'll have to take uh, the input that we are getting from the lookup. Let's say if I'll go to the source, okay. So one more important concept here. Let's say if I'm just going to the source here, if you'll see, this is a source data set. This source dataset is connected to this particularly. If I'll open this, so this is basically connecting to on-premise SQL Server. Okay, so what I'll do is this could be there could be confusion for you guys since it is named as a SQL control table. So instead I'll just rename it. Let's say I'll make it as SQL on-premise, just for better understanding of yours. Okay, so cool. So now let's say this is on-premise SQL server that we are trying to connect, right? Because we have to copy the data from on-premise SQL server. So that means the source definitely should be on-premise SQL server, right? So now if you go here, let's say if I'll create a new data set, okay, I'll just show it to you. Let's say I will create a new data set. I want to connect to some kind of a SQL server. Let's say this is not Azure SQL server, this is SQL server. That means it is an on-premise SQL server. What I'll have to do, I'll have to pass a linked service. Let's say I already created the linked service, which is pointed to this one, pointed to that server that I have in my own PC with the help of this self-hosted integration runtime, correct? Now there are two ways where you could specify what exactly table that you want to connect, correct? Or you could just mention like if you're not particular about the table, if you want to make your pipeline dynamic, you must not specify the table name, where you could instead you could have the parameters that is created. So if I'll open this particular thing, you'll see the parameters. So we are creating two different parameters here. One is schema, one is table name and the string, because there could be in one database there could be multiple schema, there could be multiple table names, so you must specify both the things as a fully qualified domain name, right? So which you should have a schema and then dot, and then you'll be having table name. Like in our case, let's say if I'll show it to you, like we have different tables. Like if I'll go to the on-premise SQL server, which is this one, in the supply chain we have dbo.control table, where dbo is a schema and control table is the table, right? Table name. So that's what we are doing here. First you have to create this parameters here. Once you create this parameter, by default these two will be created. So this two will be reflecting your parameters. Okay, so there will be schema and there will be table name. Initially it will be blank. Okay, now as we are taking the input, so we are inside this for each, right? Now we are taking the input from the lookup activity that were connected before this for each, correct? Now that lookup activity is having 4 records, it, right? So let's say if I'll open this records here, we have 4 records. So we have source object schema, where we are having the name of the schema. We have the source object name, where we are having the object name. So there will be 4 objects that will be coming. So we have to copy one, like let's say we'll have to take one object, we'll have to copy it, we can take the other object, we can copy it. So that's what we are doing. So in the schema we are not specifying any hard coded values. Instead what we'll have to do is you'll have to go here into the dynamic expression. Here you'll have to go to the for each iterator, so it will iterate through the items. So what it will do is for each item, if you go, let's say I'll just write it here. Let's say I'll just select it, so item will be selected. So I'll give at the rate item. Now this item is having the values that is output of the lookup activity, which is all these 4 records. So I want which column I want to take from this item. So I want to have the source object schema. So I'll give dot source object schema. That's how we are selecting the columns that we are getting from this particular for like item that we are getting as an input. Similarly, for the table name, what column we have? We have source object name. So we are taking at the rate item source object name. Okay, when once I'll run this pipeline, it will be more clear to you. I will show it to you how exactly it works. Okay, in a debug mode. Then now let's say we are pointing to our schema DBO. We are pointing to the object, which will be four object, where we have product table, we have supplier table, we have transportation table. All these three tables are the full load tables. Then we have purchase order table, which is the incremental load tables, right? If you could see, we only have one activity, which is the copy activity, and it is taking care of all different scenarios, whether it is full load or if it is incremental load. So where exactly we are putting this condition, right? So you must be wondering. So this is where we are using that query. If I'll expand this query, okay, I'll just, if you'll see here, what we are doing, we have put some certain kind of a permission, like you could say certain kind of a statements. So if I'll just explain it to you one by one. Okay, so let's say here, like let's say if you'll select if condition, we have if condition where we are selecting item. So in item we are getting from the output of the lookup activity, right? So in this item we will be having the load type, correct? So if I'll go here, we have this load type, right? We have different kind of load type: incremental, full load. So what we are saying, if this load type is full load, right, and not equals item load type file, and if it is not file, right, then select star from source object schema item dot source object schema and item dot source object name. Okay, so what it is saying, if it is full load and not file, then use this query, select star from. If I select this, write in a notepad. Okay, so select star from object schema name is DBO, object name is table name, right? So it means we are selecting the entire table. Now if that is not the case, that means it is incremental, right? So that means we are doing select star from schema DBO dot source object name, let's say purchase order, where item dot watermark column. So if I'll go back to this SQL Server where we have, so we are dealing currently with the purchase order table, which is incremental and not file. We have the watermark column as POID, right? So where POID is greater than item dot watermark value. So this is the watermark value which is getting stored here, which is 95, right? So we are saying select star from table where POID is greater than 95. That means it will take only those 5 records. So let me just show it to you in the preview data. Let's say we have to specify all these things. So our object schema is DBO, right? Object name is purchase order. Load type is incremental. Watermark column is POID. Watermark value is 95. Correct. Well, let me run this. So what you'll see is we were having 100 records, so it should show all the records which is greater than 95 basically, and that's where it is. So we are getting 96, 97, 98, 99, 100, right? So this is how this is where basically we are getting only those data which is the incremental data, correct? So that's how we are basically stored like taking the conditions, where if we have those tables which is either incremental, or if we have those table which is full load, we are capable to handle any of the situation with just one copy activity, right? So if I'll go back to the sync now, Okay, so sync data set is connecting to the Parquet, which is pointing to which linked service, which is pointing to the data lake storage linked service, right? And since we are dealing with a dynamic pipeline, we are not we cannot hard code the container name, the file name, because it will be changing, and that's the reason here in this parameters we'll be creating different parameter, like for like file system name, which will be basically the container name, let's say, and this will be the file name, right? So this file system name and the file name, this will be the raw, and this will be the your basically file name. So if I'll go back here, so file system name, what we are passing item dot target location. So let me go to this target location, which is pointing to the raw. That means in the ADLS it is pointing to the raw layer, correct? And what is the file name? So the file name is the target object name. So this is the target object name. So in this raw, you should be pointing to this target object name. So this is how your destination file should look like basically. So right, so that's what you are doing basically in your copy activity, where you are having a source, where you are taking all of these values, schema and table name dynamically, and you are putting a case, like kind of you putting a condition where saying that if it is a full load, then do a select star from the table. If it is an incremental, fetch out the watermark column from the control table that we have, fetch the watermark value from the control table we have, and just write a query where select star from table where the watermark column is greater than watermark value. Like in our case, select star from purchase order, where POID, which is the watermark column, is greater than 95, and that's what we saw, where we were getting just those records which were having the ID as greater than 95, correct? So here our like let's say the requirement is fulfilled, where we are able to load the data from on-premise to Azure Data Lake storage. But it's not just loading the data, but as a best practice, must follow certain mode approaches, where we must record the, let's say, the audit of those pipelines that you are running with, what is exactly the success status, or whether if it is failing, what exactly the error you are getting. So you must capture all those success failure informations basically, and then all those audit information. So that's where we have used different stored procedures. Okay, so I'll just show you this stored procedure first, and then I'll go to this activity. So here, if you'll see, if I go to the Azure SQL, so the stored procedure is basically taking input from this Azure Data Factory, doing the required task, and populating the tables that we have, which is the audit tables. So we are currently using two tables, which is if you'll see, pipeline errors table, and we have pipeline logs table. So let me first show you the tables first. So let's say if we have pipeline errors, so what all fields do we have? Okay, so let me just meanwhile get ready for the other one until it brings out the results. Pipeline, we have log. Let me comment this. Okay, transport level error has occurred. Looks like some issue with my network. I'll just try to rerun it. If you could see, this is in a disconnected state. So this usually happens if you're facing any internet issues. So yeah, I think that's good now. So, okay, so if you'll see, this is where we have the pipeline errors table, where we are maintaining all of these uh, data. You should not worry about this DDLs of the tables. We will be providing you the DDLs, so that you can just create these tables from that DDL, and we will be, so basically, as I told you, let's say I will go to the whiteboard. Okay, so let me clear this. Okay, so as I was saying, we have control table. Okay, first we have, if you'll go to the SSMS pipeline errors, so we have pipeline errors table, where we are capturing all the errors. Then we have pipeline log table. Here we are capturing all the logs, right? So all of these three are the tables. Now we are using stored procedure for updating these tables basically. So this stored procedure will be updating the pipeline logs, it will be updating the pipeline errors, and it will be also updating the control table where basically we will be updating the watermark value. Okay. So coming to these one by one, let's say if I'll first of all I'll just show it to you what these table contains, right? Let's say T1, T2, T3, T1, which I've already showed it to you, where we have the all those informations which is required in order to run the pipelines, like source object name, target object name, indicator, watermark type, watermark column, watermark value, right? Then we have pipeline errors. So where we are capturing what is the parameter ID, what is the data factory name, what is the pipeline name, what is the run ID, like basically what is the run ID of the pipeline. So these are the, like whenever you run any pipeline, there will be certain kind of a default values that will be automatically generated from the Azure side, right? So there will be a run ID that will be unique to that particular pipeline. So that will be generated. So we are trying to capture those run ID because from that run ID, you could do basically it will help you to debug. Like let's say today, what is the purpose of this error log that we are capturing? It's so that if tomorrow if we'll get to know that okay, any pipeline has got failed, we could just go to that particular pipeline in the monitor section into Azure. So if I go to Azure, here you have monitor section where it will show you what are the pipelines that is triggered, what are the pipelines that has been debugged. So you can directly go to that particular section and you could filter based on the pipeline name. But definitely the pipeline name will be common, and it will be like every time it will run, the pipeline name will remain the same, but the run ID will be different in each run. So that's what the importance of this run ID, since it will be unique, right? So you could just, it will help you in order to basically debug that particular pipeline. So we are capturing what was the source, what was the destination, what was the trigger type, was it manual or was it scheduled or event based, right? What was the trigger ID, what was the name of the trigger, what was the time of the trigger, like when was that pipeline got triggered, right? Copied, like there are some. So we have like this is a standard error table that one use. So we have some unwanted columns. In our case, since we are doing just a use case, we don't want to make this video as a very lengthy video, and hence we have kept few of those. We have not populated few of those parameters or the columns because I don't think so that is pretty much required as of now. So we could just focus on this. So we have also copy duration in seconds. What was the copy duration, what is the integration runtime that was used, what was the source type and the sync type, what was the execution, was it successful, was it failed, what was the error description that you have got. If you'll see, it will just show you what all error you have got, what was the error code, what was the logged error time, and what was the failure type, right? So all of these informations we are basically capturing in the pipeline errors. Now if I'll go to the pipeline log, all right, so if you'll see, we have the log ID, we have data factory name, which data factory, which pipeline, what is the run ID, what was the source destination, what was the trigger type, trigger name, trigger time, what was the number of rows that is copied, what is the data that it has read. There could be chance that it has read more data, but it has copied less data, right? So we have copy duration in seconds, what is the integration runtime, what was the execution status, and then start time, end time. So here also you can see like okay, today this pipeline is taking this much second for this copy, sometime it is taking a lot more than time. So we could just figure it out, okay, these are the job which is going beyond its natural time. So we are capturing each and all the details so that there could be analysis that could be done on these tables. Okay, so now how are we populating this, right? So in order to populate this, we would need a stored procedure. So if you'll see here, we have created two different stored procedure. One is for the updating log table, one is for updating the error table. So if I go to the definition of it, So this is for the updating error table. Okay, so let's say if there is any error, so if your pipeline or activity got failed, then you must update your error table, right? So we have created a procedure which is the update error table, which is capturing all of these, which is nothing but those columns which I recently showed it to you on that error table. So we are inserting this value from these values that we are getting from our pipelines. Similarly, we have update log table, stored procedure which will be updating the pipeline log table, which I just showed it to you. We will be sharing you all the details of this, so you don't need to worry. You can just create it on your own, and you could just try it at your home, and do let us know if you face any difficulties in it. Okay, so this is the procedure that we have for the update log table, where we are doing insert into, and then we are taking the values. We do have one more stored procedure where we will be updating the watermark table. Okay, so based on the time constant that we have today, we are not covering that. In the next part, when we will be dealing with the rest part of the medallion, we will be going to the bronze and all. We will be showing you that stored procedure. By adding that stored procedure, how do we exactly add that watermark also. Okay, so if you'll see here, currently we have added these two stored procedure, which is one is for success, one is for failed. Success should update which one, the pipeline update log table, right? So this is calling this stored procedure, and this update log table will uh, insert value into pipeline log table, right? So as soon as you select the store procedure, you'll be able to import all of these input parameters of that store procedure, and you should specify uh, values which is by default, you could say captured by Azure. Okay, like let's say queuing duration is like copy data, output execution details. We will be providing, if you want, we will be uploading all of this into our Git, and we'll be sharing you this Git location so that you could get all of these informations. Similarly, like data factory, you could get it from pipeline data factory, and similarly you have pipeline name, you'll get pipeline, right? And so you have run id, you'll get it from pipeline run id. So all of these information that was there in the table, you could get it from by applying all of these. So I will share you all of these values that you need to put it there, so that will help you to load these values so that it could be loaded into the table. Similarly, we have the other update error table, and you have these columns that was present in the logged error table, and these are the values that it's supposed to pass, and that's it. And as I told you, the next video will be just adding one more stored procedure where we'll be the updating how we are updating the watermark value, and what are we supposed to do post this raw layer that we have built. So right, if you could see here, till this raw layer, if I'll if you'll see here, till this raw layer we have created our pipeline, correct? So let me do one thing. Let me just run this pipeline, and I'll show you how exactly it looks like. Okay, so we just have to do a debug, since we have not created in a trigger, or we have not scheduled it, and just for the reference purpose we have just done a debug, and we are not focusing more on the Azure these components detail, because there's a lot of things to learn. So we'll be focusing on this and the other videos. If you want, you can just post us in the comments if there is any other topic that you want us to make a video on, and we'll be happy to assist you guys. Okay, so this is what it is running. So if you'll see, this is the lookup table, this is the debug. If since I'm doing the debug, you could, if it is a triggered, you could look at here in the monitor section, you could go to the debug, and you could see what all pipelines that you have debugged. Okay, if I'll go back to the author, so let's see. So this get control table, okay, now see, this is getting the four records, since we were having the four records in the lookup table, right? So we were having all these records in the kind of a JSON format, where we have, if you see, we have DBO purchase order, then we have DBO product, then we have supplier, then we have transportation. So we are getting all these four tables as a source from the lookup table. And if you, as I was saying, right, we it will throw all the values that is present in the table. So we have all the columns that is there in the lookup in that particular table right now. there is a for each which is currently running, which is taking the item count as 4. It took just all the data. Now this copy data, what it will do is, basically this is the input what it is getting. Okay, so if you'll see here, this is the supplier, and if you remember, the supplier data was full load, so it is just taking a select star from the supplier. Let's go to the another input, select star from DBA purchase order, where PO ID is greater than 95. So that is what I was saying to you, where we have written that logic. It is automatically by default taking the watermark column as PO ID, and the watermark value it is taking from the control table, right? And it is just bringing those records. If I'll uh, if you'll see if I'll go to the other input, I just went to the output actually. If you go to this other input, which is the product, it's just again select star from the DBA product, and then if I'll go to the other one, which is to select star from the transportation, that means we do not have any where clause on all of these, and that means that is a full load and not the incremental load. Once that is done, we have the stored procedure success, where we are calling this stored procedure, where we are loading this. So if I'll go back to our SQL Server Management Studio, and if I'll run a command in order to see whether the one which we have run is updated or not. So let's say we will go to the pipeline log. Since it was successful, it won't throw any error. And if I'll execute it, okay, so if you'll see here, this is the latest one, where we have, based on the time, you could see where we have loaded all of these data. Okay, there were 100 record, 4 record, 5 record, 35k records. All of these data are loaded, right? And yeah, that's it. We have all of these information. If I'll go to the product purchase order, right? So if you remember, we were having 100 records in this, and we told where PO ID is greater than 95. That means we are left with 5 records: 96, 97, 98, 99, 100. And if you could see here, the rows that is copied is 5 records, correct? So that's what the beauty of this dynamic pipeline that we have. That's what the beauty of this control table that we have, and from one control table, you are able to handle any kind of a situation, any kind of a load, right? You are not creating any multiple pipelines for 4 tables. Let's say tomorrow 1000 tables get added, you just have to add those tables into the control table, and this one pipeline will be sufficient enough, like, to handle all those tables for any type of data loads, right? So to conclude our third part, I'll just come again to this particular slide that we have, where we were having till the raw format. If you could see, this is the ADLS Gen 2. We are able to load the entire data into this ADLS Gen 2, which is nothing but simple replica of our sources, right? In the next part of the video, we will be focusing more on the bronze layer, where we will be calling the Azure Database notebook, and then we will be enriching that data to the silver layer in the terms of a delta table, and then we'll performing some kind of a business transformations in order to reach to the gold layer. So that's what our intention is, right? So that's it for today. I hope you would have liked the video. Do let us know in comments that if you have faced any of the issues while understanding, or if you want us to throw light more on any of the topics. Also please do not forget to subscribe us, as it will really help us to get more videos for you guys, to help you to get into data engineering, which is our motto, right? So thank you, have a nice day, bye.